Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the situation in Israel, the situation in the Gaza Strip, Syria somewhat, and we'll try and broaden it depending on the time that we have for today, it's always important to remember that today we mark 572 days since the atrocities committed by the Islamist Hamas terror organization on October 7th of 2023. And we also mark today Israel's Remembrance Day for all of the fallen during the course of the various wars that Israel was plagued with over the course of its 77 years of independence. A staggering number of 25,420 people who have lost their lives during the course of all of Israel's wars. And just since October 7th, the number is 5,944 fallen. And this is, of course, the majority of them during the first year of the war, to include the atrocities committed by the Islamist Hamas terror group on October 7th. And over the course of the past year, 319 have lost their lives. Also, something that we need to mark. It is a significant number, but of course, it's overshadowed by the atrocities committed on October 7th and the subsequent year and a half of conflict. Now, let's turn to our panelists for today, to include Mr. Ori Saschal, who is the head of research at the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF, commonly referred to here in Israel as the Bitronistim. And next to him, Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist, as well as a longtime panelist here at TV7 and a senior fellow also at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. It is good to see you both. And I'd like to start with you, Colonel Ben Shalom. Naturally, Remembrance Day touches all of us dearly. And there are sirens that sound yesterday at 8 p.m., today at 11 a.m., in memory of all of the fallen of Israel who've made the ultimate price, sacrificed themselves in the line of duty. And for me personally, this year was again bearing in mind a good friend of mine who I grew up with, Arnon Zamora, who passed away, who was killed actually in action while rescuing 4 Israeli hostages from Hamas captivity. The rescue operation was successful. Nevertheless, he had to make a moment's choice, and unfortunately, that cost him his life in the course of a battle. He survived by a wife and 2 lovely boys who will have to also bear this with them for the rest of their lives. But nonetheless, Colonel Ben Shalom, from your perspective, how do you mark this day?
Absolutely, and this personal story that you brought now shows us that this is a national day, national remembrance, and there's certainly many national aspects to it. But each and every one of us is connected in a personal way. As a pilot, of course, I have many friends from my squadron that we lost along the way. But of course, each and every individual friend is a world in itself. We also have a tradition in the Air Force where we go and we accompany families and we stand by the grave with the family. I want to let you in on a personal anecdote from this morning that I went to a friend that I've been going to his grave ever since I buried him with my own hands, Lieutenant Colonel Avner Goldman, who was killed in a helicopter crash in Romania in 2010. And I noticed that some friends that I've seen in past years were not there with me. And I was thinking, I wonder where they went. And then it hit me. Of course, each and every one of us have so many additional friends, family members, and people that we know from school, from our neighborhood, that this, in a way, reshuffled some of our personal traditions as far as who we accompany, who we hug, who we walk with. Another personal thing today from the ceremony is that I walked into this place that I know very well, and I couldn't find my bearings. I thought I was lost. I walked back out to the entrance, and I said, no, this is the regular entrance. Why do I feel like vertigo? The reason is all the additional graves since October 7th have changed this landscape with another row and another row of new tombstones. So I'm sorry to bring you in again on this personal aspect, but certainly a very meaningful national day, and during wartime brings us to many reflections of where we are, where we stand, and how we're moving ahead as far as our sovereignty, security, stability, and the future of the country.
Absolutely. Well, it is a day that we're all, again, quite impacted by. But Mr. Issachawan, you look at this day, naturally, we had multiple state ceremonies, private ceremonies, local ceremonies in various localities. And one of the main themes of the discussions, just a couple of hours before we're transitioning into the joy of our Independence Day, 77 years in, was there's still 59 hostages in Hamas captivity for 572 days since Hamas kidnapped them on October 7th of 2023. And what comes to mind is a commitment to do everything necessary to bring them home, be they alive or, unfortunately, already murdered.
Absolutely. This is a day of reckoning that Israel's survival long term for generations is dependent on those who are willing to come and sacrifice and to go right to the line of fire. This morning I was also attending the ceremony at the Holon military cemetery where my father's brother is buried. He fell in the Yom Kippur War. Many personal stories from that war, from my father's personal friends. Some of them were siblings who died in the same war. Imagine what parents have to go through in a very short time span. Or other stories like that of Orit Mark Ettinger, who came to our summit just last month, who lost her father during a terrorist attack just last decade, shooting attack, Rabbi Mark, followed by her older brother who died in a Mossad covert activity, and her other brother who fell in Gaza over the course of this war. So this Israel is full of these sort of personal stories, and it touches upon really all of us. And it is indeed a reminder also about our brothers and sisters who can be saved and are now in Hamas captivity in Gaza. 59 of them, at least 24 are considered alive. And we not only look backwards and at our heroes and commemorate them and cherish them every single day, especially today, but also looking forward and asking ourselves, how can we save those who can still be saved? We can still see how Hamas sort of entrenches itself in its position. And it seems to me that after 572 days, it's time to turn the switch on and ask ourselves a bigger question, which is how much longer can we leave them there? One day is too many. And so the idea here is the government, I think, is facing a crucial dilemma, whether or not to change strategy altogether with a very favorable administration in the United States, whether President Trump will be willing to put more pressure on Iran, for example, on Hamas. Hamas is its protege. Much of its funding comes from there. Qatar, who also is responsible for much of Hamas funding, and Egypt, who can today open the gates of Gaza to make true on his promise to resettle the Gazan population elsewhere. All these things are sort of external factors that are complicating factors to the war, and the White House has the power to do them today. And Israel itself can also ask itself a bigger question: how can it ramp up pressure on Hamas to get itself a deal in more favorable conditions?
Indeed. Well, Colonel Ben Shalom, let's take it one step forward. There is reported progress in the talks between Egypt and Israel, including Hamas conceding, at least at the political level, the acquiescence to deliberate prospects of leadership exile from the Gaza Strip, alongside also the disarmament of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, something, though, that is not accepted yet by the military wing of the Islamist terror group, namely the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades, whose leader, Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who was successfully eliminated during this war, is still very adamant to continue fighting, irrespective of what anyone demands of him. Of course, this can change tomorrow in the event that he is targeted. But nonetheless, this is an ongoing situation. Meanwhile, the IDF is also calling up additional forces to prepare for a larger maneuver in the Gaza Strip to further escalate the pressures on this terror group and its various affiliated groups, which are no less dangerous, which is an understatement.
Sensitivity here, of course, is obvious, but it's not only sensitive and difficult on the grounds, it's also sensitive politically, with internal discourse inside of Israel pretty much divided between two camps, and they not only contradict each other, but each camp thinks the other side is completely crazy and completely out of touch of reality and based on totally different narratives. Now, the Israeli government is locked on this narrative now that we are striving towards a victory, or in the past it was total victory. Notice that the terminology has changed a bit. And everything else that is not total victory is shaped, or the narrative is shaped to be perceived as giving in or capitulating or even surrendering. I think this is a problematic way to frame the narrative, is because when you frame many possibilities as failure or giving in, so of course nobody wants to give in, so we're only left with the option of pushing forward with military means towards the victory. Again, very problematic as far as the discourse. I wouldn't take rhetoric relating to negotiations at face value. Why? Because the parties float these ideas many times in order to see what the media says, what the public says, see if it's even relevant. And remember that every time that something's brought up by Egypt or the Arab League, something that has to do with something that is less than this total victory that the Israeli government wants, the Israeli government is going to disregard it or object to it. There were already pretty interesting ideas on the table. Remember also that everything that has to do with the Palestinian Authority will not be accepted by the government. Netanyahu said it very clearly this week. His rhetoric was so powerful, I don't even want to repeat it here, but it was something like pretty much saying that Hamas and the PA are the same, so I would replace this for that. Extremely problematic. I think in a way I hinted to where I lean here, and all I'll say here is that I think we should find more middle ground. Just related to what you said about moving forward, certainly the IDF in implementing the policy is preparing for the next step up of operations on the ground, very clearly to maximize the pressure on Hamas and bring them to the table to have some kind of deal. But all of this, I'm sorry to say deal, I'm using Trump rhetoric, but to bring about some kind of framework that will ultimately lead to where this government is trying to reach, all the way to realization of Trump's plan.
Indeed. Well, an outline, I think, would be the right terminology here. But nonetheless, I will point out that today, when we're marking Remembrance Day, usually what I do identify is that all sectors of society are hurting. And therefore, the social and national solidarity with one another, irrespective of the political discourse, which is a matter of how to get to the right objective ultimately, which I don't think there is much difference between any of the political stances in Israel about the final goal, but nonetheless, the process there is vigorous, and the leadership in Jerusalem does need to take its own considerations, which are not always popular. Let's put it frankly. I will point out Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, laid it out, where he said during the international summit of the JNS here in Jerusalem, that there are groups that come and say, you should just release the hostages and forget about the other goals. Others say, go for the goals of the war, of defeating Hamas and such, and forget about the hostages. But ultimately, the decision that was taken by the Security Cabinet in Jerusalem was to go for all of the various goals, as you mentioned, something that, of course, is very ambitious on the one point, but following October 7th, I do understand the merit behind that necessity. Mr. Issachar, your take on that?
Look, I think ultimately Israelis were asked to sacrifice at many inflection points over the past 3 decades, and we haven't seen it working. And I like to look backwards at what hasn't worked then look forward at what can work. For example, the 1993 Oslo Accords that established the Palestinian Authority, we haven't seen one iota of sign that the Palestinian Authority is a pragmatic and peaceful actor in the Middle East. On the contrary, no condemnation of October 7 came out of the Palestinian Authority, and we analyzed it in our research department, text in Arabic. On the contrary, senior officials, we're not talking about a deputy of a chairman of an association, senior officials such as Mahmoud al-Alul, who is the deputy president of the Palestinian Authority, said that it was a heroic act, October 7, that all the Palestinian people should be proud of, the stars in the skies of the Palestinian struggle. Same goes for other senior ministers who are potential in line to replace Mahmoud Abbas if and when he evacuates his seat. And so I find it hard to believe an entity who pays over $400 million a year to terrorists as to incentivize more Palestinians to join the circle of terrorism and violence is a peaceful actor. And Israel should not compromise anymore. I think in the morning of October 7, we woke up to a shattered misconception of 1,200 pieces in which we understood, I think, finally, that one cannot compromise fundamental security principles. This failed paradigm that any and all failed Palestinian governmental entities could take over Gaza. We've been there. August 2005, Palestinian Authority was soon to collapse. Within less than 2 years, Hamas took power. There is no indication that if the Palestinian Authority takes over today, this will be any different. So we're basically paving the path to our own demise once again. So one has to really show more sobriety, and with the Jewish people with such innovation, I do believe that there are many other pathways on the ground. We put forward the humanitarian islands plan. There are many different sort of city-states or Emirates plans, and of course Trump's plan of willful migration. All these things put together can fundamentally change reality in Gaza, when the ultimate goal is to make the Gaza Strip a more peaceful and prosperous place as much as possible. I don't believe that trying out all sort of prescriptions from the past that haven't worked will lead us ultimately to a better result.
From a percentages perspective, according to a number of cases, study cases, with regard to the Gaza Strip, in the higher levels of 70s, namely roughly 76, 77% of Gazan population is keen on relocating for a period of time. That is speaking volumes about the true reality on the ground. But at the same time, we also have a very interesting dilemma here, since the so-called internationally aspired two-state solution is more desired by the Israeli side than by the Palestinian side these days. I mean, even before Hamas was elected, the public number of people who were keen on a two-state solution was merely at the lower levels of 2.4%. So we're talking here about, Western aspirations and a certain society or group within Israeli society seeking for a two-state solution. At some points, it was even more than half of Israeli population. These days, following October 7th, it's lower than that. But nonetheless, the vast majority of the Palestinian street does believe in a one-state solution from the river to the sea. And that is something that is articulated also by the leadership in Ramallah in closed doors. Of course, publicly, they're highlighting time and again the 1967 lines, but that's just a starting point to their actual aspirations. I think, publicly speaking, even the son of Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called president of the Palestinian Authority, or chairman thereof, came out and stated openly that he does not believe in a two-state solution, but rather thinks that a one-state solution is the only viable option. So we need to understand that to take more than just two to tango, especially in such a complicated conflict as this one. But let's shift gears to another theater. I don't have very much time for that, but nonetheless, the situation in Syria is slowly escalating. There was roughly 72 hours ago, there were recordings circulating in social media claiming to be of some Druze sheikh, religious leader, speaking ill of the self-proclaimed Prophet Muhammad, of the founder of Islam, during the course of which there was a lot of frustration and anger calling for genocide of the Druze community by the Sunni Muslim population, and attacks started to mount against Sahbaya as well as Jaramana, communities that are predominantly Druze with Christian minorities south of Damascus. And the current situation is that they are besieged by those Islamist groups. There are efforts by Sweda military committees and other groups to go and help their Druze brethren in the north. Israel also conveyed a certain message warning HTS against harming the Druze, but nonetheless, it's a very complicated situation. Colonel Ben Shalom, take it away.
There are historic precedences to things happening to our east, where Israel is concerned. We want to shape something, and we issue warnings, and we say we're going to come in and we're going to do it if need be. Also, what I'm referencing, we not always have to go in and do it forcefully. Sometimes just that warning enough is enough. We see now Druze leaders in Israel calling out to the Israeli government, this is our time to step up and come to the rescue of our friends. And these messages coming out of Israel, I think, are good. I think that we have a responsibility. I would even say a historic responsibility when it comes to the Druze community. In general, about what's happening in Syria now, I think that every week I change my mind. In the beginning, I started optimistic. Very soon, I thought, no, this is the same old Al-Qaeda affiliates that are maybe wearing suits and talking nice. And then they talked even nicer. So when they say very clearly, we don't want a war with Israel, so I'm thinking, hey, you know what, this could work out. So I think there's no reason to listen to what I believe today, because tomorrow I may think something else. I think in general, what the truth is that I want to be optimistic. I want to believe that people that overthrew the Assad regime have a historic opportunity to turn their land into a wonderful place. The people of Syria suffered enough. Why wouldn't they go forward? Unfortunately, I'm going to save all from criticizing me or opposing me, and I'll say, why? Because this is the region. There are deeper issues here. There are religious issues. There are goals and narratives being promoted. That's why we have to be vigilant. And I agree that after October 7th, we have no choice but to be very, very extremely careful, to have our boots on the ground forward, a forward deployed defense. And sometimes it looks aggressive, but we probably have no choice.
Well, the fact of the matter, they are jihadists, they are Islamists, they speak nicely, and they're very good at that. They have a lot of advice in this aspect, and I think wishful thinking goes across the board, not only here in Israel, the United States, Europe. There is wishful thinking everywhere, but I think the Americans these days are less delusional than their European counterparts when it comes to jihadism in the form of whatever they're trying to convey. But nonetheless, they do seek stability. So sometimes they're to deal with bad actors, if that provides stability, that is something that certain governments are willing to do. Let's wait and see what happens with the Trump administration. But Mr. Issachar, what's your take on that?
Look, yeah, I couldn't agree more with Colonel. I think, well, the art of power always overcomes, and the human nature is such that once you're given an opportunity to actually improve, you find yourself in a situation of power, and that does not always lead you to good places, i.e. Eastern Europe after World War II, after so much suffering and despotism, that has become once again a dark and closed up place for the next 45 years. But look, beware of the devil. He always comes as a gentleman, and we see how HTS is attempting to sort of display a veneer of normalcy and pro-Westernism, and to a certain degree, it could look better than the raw and sort of rough on the edges version of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Less military vests and more suits and ties, and the beards are a bit more trimmed. But in the end, the content remains the same. Their aspirations remain the same. Now, it does not follow that the West should not cooperate with them. And Israel, I have to tell you, that should take advantage of the situation for its own interest. You know, at some aspects, the Israeli conduct in Syria has been a masterclass of what it should do in the other arenas. Just imagine that in Lebanon, we would have totally annihilated the vast majority of the military capabilities of Hezbollah, just like Israel did with the remains of the Syrian military post-Assad. Since 2011, basically all of the Iranian force buildup, missiles, rockets, drones, etc., were destroyed by Israeli strikes. And immediately following the Assad regime's, the fall of the Assad regime, Israel took over the remainder of the Golan Heights and opened up to the Druze minority in Syria, such a national security asset to cooperate with the minorities in the region that are like-minded, that can share interests. Imagine if we did that in Lebanon, in Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, elsewhere. So the point here is to try to take the Syrian model as to improve it as much as possible, but to take more of it to the rest of the arenas in the Middle East. I do believe that the West and Trump, as the U.S. president, have interest in Syria to make it a more palatable place, to bring back millions of refugees from Europe and the United States into Syria and opening up to a place that can accommodate the Druze and Kurd minorities. That could not happen without Israeli backup, the military presence, and the sort of power projection around the Druze areas in southern Syria. This is where interest can coalesce, and I do believe that we have the power to do so.
Don't forget also the Christian minority that is also very significant in many of the southern Syria regions, and Israel is also taking a very close eye and care for the Christian alongside the Druze communities there. But we don't have any time left for the other topics thus far. With that, I will take this opportunity to congratulate both of you for 77 years of Israeli independence. So, and also to immediately thank Colonel Ben Shalom and Mr. Issachar for all of your valuable insights. And I'd like also to thank all of you at home as well. And immediately wish all of you a happy Israeli Independence Day. Good evening. Until our next edition. From here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Eran Lerman. I used to be Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of Israel. Currently Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a think tank, and the editor of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. For the last few years, I've been a regular panelist for TV7, a fantastic opportunity to bring deep and analytical perspectives to the debate over regional affairs, Israeli affairs, international affairs, in the company of some of the best minds in Israel.